Darren, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you've got such a cool story. I just did your intro, and I guess what I really want to know about is how you got into the music business and what that was like before we get to cybersecurity. But maybe start me from like the beginning of your career. Where did that start? How did you end up in the music business? Where are you from? Like wherever you want to start.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm from a really small place in Canada.
Okay.
It's actually an island by the name of Cape Breton Island. Has a population of circa 100,000 people on the whole island.
Okay.
The biggest town is, I guess, about 32,000 people. And it's in the province of Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. I grew up in a household where my mom ran a dance school, which when I would have been born, that dance school actually was in the basement of my home. So my mother ran an arts and culture business from my home. So I grew up in that business and from a very early age played some degree of a role in that business. And I gravitated towards technical things. So I started helping her with stuff like editing music. So we're talking about back in the olden days before computers, right? I was born in
Sure.
74. So editing music was like you had reel to reel tapes with a song. You'd
Right.
record a song from a record or a tape onto a reel. Then you would actually like find where you wanted cut out an intro or a verse or get rid of a bridge for a particular dance routine, and you would draw with a little piece of chalk on the tape, and then you'd take the tape off and you would cut the tape, and then you would actually tape the tape back together, and that's how you edited music,
Oh my
right? So
God.
so I was doing stuff like that, and I was running like helping with PA systems and setting up audio equipment. And when there was concerts or recitals, I was doing lighting and doing like all that kind of stuff. So I think that was a pretty formative growing up experience that just kind of made be doing your own thing and working in the arts being a pretty natural thing for me. And so fast forward, and my parents wanted me to do like most parents do. They want you to make more money than they do.
Sure.
And so there was a lot of emphasis on education and getting a strong education. I ended up doing French immersion, becoming bilingual in French at quite a young age. And then, as many people do, I went on the guidance of my guidance counselor based on my aptitude for numbers and my ability to just be good at things like physics and math and calculus. I went into university for 2 years and basically went into pre-engineering and was basically like, I don't know, filled out some computer program that told me I'd be good as an engineer. So I'm like, okay, that looks good. You make
Right.
lots of money. I did that for 2 years. It was very clear to me that this wasn't really based on purpose. I wasn't really as engaged as I should have been, and was enjoying life more than I was enjoying school. So I left university, went on an exchange program to Hungary for a year, and that just really opened my eyes to a lot of very creative people and a lot of different ways of thinking. Again, coming from a really small town, you kind of like sometimes adopt a pretty small perspective of what the world looks like. And
Sure.
so that brought me, after that, I really just kind of came to the conclusion, like, what do I want to do? I should just do that, right? Like, don't follow the money, follow where you want to go. And I had been playing music my whole life. I like being around music, being around dance and music and art. I played a lot. I decided, you know what, that's what I want to do. So I'm gonna start a band, and I'm just gonna take a crack at it. And I spent about 10 years of my life playing in various different bands professionally, and that
What
led to.
what
Go ahead.
not to interrupt, but what geography? Like where because you went over to Hungary, you decided to dump this, but when you started playing music, were you back in Canada or where were
Yeah, I
you?
came back. I came back to Canada after the exchange program
Okay.
and started a band in my hometown, and just we just played gigs locally and then throughout Nova Scotia and a few other neighboring provinces. Didn't really go very far. Ended up quitting that, moving to Montreal, studying more music with other different people, doing a lot of like freelance stuff over there. Moved over to Cuba for a while and traveled quite a bit for a few years. Then I came back, took a role with a band that had already been somewhat established. And no, we had local success. Like we had some national charts. We won some awards, and things like that. But it was a hard go. We were playing like 150 shows a year, and It's a
Whoa.
pretty fun lifestyle when you're super young, but it can wear on you. There's certain people that they just like they live for the road, and then there's others that it can burn you out pretty quick. And
Yeah, and
after about
I've had some friends like not to, but I've had some friends that like it's really, and you tell me because I'm looking at it obviously from an outsider, but I've had some friends on like the cusp of really doing well, like where they've opened for bands that everybody's heard of, right? And you're like, oh my god, you were on tour with like Incubus, for example. That's one friend of mine, and it was like,
yeah,
yeah. And he goes, and at my peak, I was making 50 grand a year. You know what I mean? I mean, now the next payday would have been, it's almost like it's a hockey stick going up, right?
yeah,
But he said they were just grinding it out, and by then he had kids, and it was like, how long do I
yeah.
kind of want to stay in this 150, 200 nights on the road thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I mean, I think at peak I might have been making like 38, 40, 42K a year.
Right.
And so, which is fine when you're 22 and you're living in an apartment with a couple of your buddies and
Sure.
like, but fast forward to you start growing up and want to own a house, and then you meet somebody and you want to start thinking about different things, that gets really challenging. And so I started diversifying. Like one of the things I was always super, super into technology. Like I said, from the early days of editing those reel to reel tapes in my mom's business. And
Yeah.
when the band I was playing with, we were very active in the studio, and I started just really gravitating to that and taking an active role, and started really getting into studio stuff to the point where I co-engineered the first record that band did since I got on board. And they liked that. We liked that because it was cutting costs, but it forced me to learn computers, right? Because this is now we're in early 2000, like 99, 2000, 2001. Pro Tools and things like that were starting to become pretty mainstream. And so learned a lot about like using computers, because I'm the type of person that if I'm going to use something for real purposes, I need to understand it. So got really into that, started doing a lot of like side gigs when I was not on the road. I would do some playing on people's records. I would do some engineering and helping bands in that sense, even starting to do some like technical, like helping people set up computer environments for artistic purposes, like setting up machines, optimizing machines to run certain music and type programs and stuff like that. And so I just like that kind of got to the point where for me, the music, I was really getting tired of the road. So at one point when I started, I was like, I'd be really excited when a tour was starting. And then it kind of
Yeah.
evolved to like, oh shit, we're going on the road again.
Right.
And so I just like, I ended up doubling down and quitting the band and starting a record label. And so I kind of rolled up my all of the things I was doing into a label. We signed a deal with EMI Canada for distribution. We signed a deal with ABC in Australia for distribution. We had all kinds of perspectives in the US and over in Europe. We signed 4 bands. We got some funding. We got funding from EMI, and we went out and took a hard crack at being a record label.
I
And of
gotta
course,
stop you. I gotta stop you though. But how do you go from being like a kid that's on the road, you're making 38 grand, you start to do some stuff on the side. I'm guessing you make some contacts there, but that's a pretty big leap to just start a record label shortly after that. Like how old were you and
I
yeah,
was
what
like
was the catalyst to getting that done?
I was like mid late 20s at this point. And one of the things I guess, I did spend, so there was a band that I got hired to be the lead singer of. Their lead singer quit, and they were a Universal Canada signed band with a high prospect record deal in the US. And their management company hired me.
Okay.
And it was not a type of music that I wanted to do. It was not something that I was musically or creatively or artistically excited about, but it just seemed like a really good opportunity to learn the business. And I actually roomed with their manager who toured with them. So I kind of treated it like an immersive opportunity to like learn more about it. And even in the bands that I worked with before, like I played a pretty big part in running and managing those bands. So I learned through jumping in the deep end, but this was an opportunity to learn how like professionals that have established careers in this do that. So I guess that's where I learned a lot about the industry in that context. And so yeah, I ended up finding a partner who had a lot of experience in record production and in the industry. So I wasn't alone at the record label thing. And yeah, there was a couple of hot bands coming out of my region that we were really well poised to do something with them. And it all kind of happened really, really quickly. But unfortunately, like this was kind of all around where the industry was also really struggling from like file sharing was
Oh,
becoming
Napster
mainstream.
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is a hard go. We didn't, like again, we had bands charting, and it's like, okay, so now you go from making 30 something thousand dollars a year as a on the cusp band to making $30,000 or something on the year from
Yeah,
managing 4 or 5 on the cusp bands.
right.
It became pretty challenging, and I just hit a point where I was like, you know what, like I need to do something where there's more of an uplift in the industry versus the contrary, right? And that's what led me into doing my first startup. So one of the things that was interesting about the record label, because I was kind of obsessed about technology, we were using like web-based applications before people were saying like the cloud, or before it was the norm to use web applications. And a lot of what we created in the record label was like the whole part of the model of the record label was like leveraging technology to be hyper efficient. And so learned a lot in doing that. Got an opportunity to work with a lot of things like Basecamp, 37 Signals, like early days, first version type stuff that we were
Mhm.
using pretty heavily. I got the idea of like, well, what if I built a software explicitly for touring acts and arts and music? So we went out, my co-founder and myself. My co-founder was a software developer who was also like a kick-ass musician in another band. And we went out, we got some funding, we built a platform for touring artists and management companies. Now, of course, I'm still going to the same well, the well that doesn't have much money. So it was a tough
Right.
business. But what we did was when we realized that we were really struggling with the market we chose, we actually looked at, is there any other are there any other markets that we could work with that may have maybe a bigger pain point and more budget? And we made a transition and a pivot to work towards music festivals. So we started with local music festivals in Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada. And then by 2014, which was like we launched this thing in 2010, 2011, by 2014, we'd signed Coachella, Bonnaroo. We were in talks with Burning Man. We had festivals in the Netherlands and in Germany, so it was like that worked really well, and we were able to between in the period of a couple of years go from like a cash burning, struggling startup to a cash flow positive business. And that's kind of how I stumbled on security, because the nature of the product that we had built and the pull that the customers had brought us in terms of the things that they wanted that platform to do meant that it started to really collect masses of highly confidential information, but
Mhm.
also it started to become integral to other systems that it was integrated with, that if our system was to go down for a short period of time in certain time frames, certain windows of time, it would be catastrophic. So some of these festivals being owned by corporate entities like Disney and Live Nation meant a lot of scrutiny around our security practices, which is where we really got thrown into the fire on security. And funny enough, at the same time, my brother played a fairly senior role in the RCMP, the Canadian Federal Police Force, in and around an area that involved cybercrime. So at the same time that I was experiencing that, the sort of experience we were having with our platform and the type of scrutiny we were being put through by our more sophisticated customers, I was also getting a lot of influence and a lot of information about the growth of cybercrime and the opportunity in protecting digital assets. So it kind of just kind of like one of those weird things where you just stumble into a situation. And for us, like the diving into cybersecurity became a survival obligation in my last company. And we were not like, we weren't looking, we didn't, we were bootstrapped. So it was a problem that I personally and my co-founder, he solved it from the technical perspective, where I solved it from the risk and the documentation and the security governance perspective. And that's really how I got into it. And I just kind of thought it was a fascinating space in a weird way. I don't know. There's something weirdly attractive to me about a big, messy problem that where you really see an opportunity to have a different perspective. And I think cybersecurity lacks communication and creativity and presentation. There's a lot of dryness, a lot of staleness. There's a
Mhm.
lot of technical, and then you get a lot of this headbutting where a lot of the times the bigger problems in cybersecurity aren't necessarily of a technical nature. It's the lack of ability for organizations to navigate changing their perspectives, changing their practices. And so I just saw a huge opportunity, and it was very clear to me that the advantages of cybercrime from an organized crime perspective far outweighed any crime opportunities that previously existed in terms of risk reward ratio. And so it was just very clear that cybercrime is going to explode. And what's that going to mean? It's going to create this massive need for expertise or platforms. And so just got really obsessed about it as a next opportunity as I was starting to eye the exit of that last company and starting to sort of go through that process of selling the last company. I just got really gravitated towards this opportunity.
Who bought Marcato?
It was a company called Patron Technologies, and it was backed by Providence Equity Group out of Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. And so I mean, they were on a pretty aggressive roll up. I think they bought 8 or 9 companies that covered various different aspects of the event technology space. Really good. It was a great idea. Like the idea was to bring it all together,
Layer them, yeah.
layer them all together so you can have a full solution. Because what was happening in that space, which is not different than a lot of spaces, is the tech stack for a festival would turn into like 8 or 9 different vendors.
Sure.
And early days, it's like things are breaking and APIs and companies are struggling trying to make stuff work. So their value proposition was very much around just making everything work and being able to roll in, have one single point of contact from a sales perspective, be able to approach things with efficiency. Now, unfortunately, not long after they concluded their roll up, COVID came, and we all know what that did
Oh,
to events and festival space. So, from my perspective, dodged a bullet. We got out about less than a year before COVID became an issue. But that meant for that business, that meant that big growth trajectory they were on really kind of fell flat on its face. And the company still exists, and my understanding, I don't really follow it as close as possible, but but like I know that platform that we sold to them doesn't exist anymore, which is kind of like, oh well, it is what it is. But they had to make some tough decisions, and they cut that team down pretty close, pretty small. But my understanding is it's still a company is still back on a growth trajectory of some sorts.
so when you founded Carbide, like, was that? Did you bootstrap it? Did you get investors? Like, how did you pivot into that industry fully?
Yeah, we did some friends and family, and then we did like a pre-seed round. We're still trying to prove a concept, trying to figure out what it is we were going to do. And it's kind of interesting. Like I was new to the cybersecurity space. I mean, I knew it only from the experience we had. So a little bit of hesitation initially, but and then we figured out where we really saw the opportunity was in SMBs and companies that were selling software or more technically driven solutions into enterprise, because enterprise was really starting to tighten up its third party risk management functions. And yeah, so we launched our product in like mid to late 2019, and we raised a series seed round in early 2021. And I guess it was probably like mid to late 2018 when like once the transaction had closed on the last company, and I really was like, okay, we're doing this. This is real. Let's roll up our sleeves, and this is the project.
Was it tough to grow that during COVID since it was kind of started just before, or I don't I don't really have clarity on. I assume just from my vantage point that all spending was pulled back during COVID, at least early COVID, but I don't know if that's the case when it came to something that was booming like cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like, yeah, I mean, it was definitely a roller coaster. Like, so there were challenges. I guess the first one was we would always operated every business I ever been, we'd always worked together in an office. So the first piece of the transition was trying to, there's just a lot of things inherently culturally in a business from a communication perspective that happen naturally when you're a small team working in a small workspace
Sure.
that you have to become more deliberate with when you migrate to a remote model. I would say initially, yeah, definitely like everyone kind of panicked and money and spending slowed down considerably. But not long after that, the VC, there was we all saw a massive increase in venture spending and valuations out of control. And there were things that happened that started to become advantageous for us. Like, for example, there was a lot of investment going into med tech or health tech, because there was, okay, how do we deliver healthcare? You look at these antiquated, old
Mm.
school, still sending faxes, everything happening in person health system that now had to remodel itself. There's also a lot of opportunity came out of the transition. And so then there was, there was a lot of growth in demand. But I think from our perspective, it was definitely a challenge to grow a company faster than I've ever grown a company before, team wise, doing it all entirely remote. Yeah, it wasn't an easy. There was a lot of lessons learned the hard way, I
Sure.
think, about, how do you grow a business? And, sometimes growing too fast can be very damaging or very challenging. And, it's easier to spend, it's not hard to spend money, but it is hard to spend money and increase your spending money quickly while maintaining efficiency and effectiveness in your spend. So, yeah, it was a tough go. And then of course, I think there was a lot of printing money that happened in trying to keep the economy going from a government perspective during the COVID times. And of course, then we had I think more dramatic crash in the digital economy, which is, what really started to happen in 2022 and proceeded to deepen in 2023. And I think I don't really know, like I don't want to, I'm not going to call the future, but it seems like things are kind of piecing themselves back together. But as we've seen, there's been a lot of cutting in costs across the tech industry over the last 2 years, which proves to be both a challenge and an opportunity.
You said when you went at it, I mean, initially you guys were highly focused in these like more technical kind of online type industries. Has that changed at all? I mean, who is your core demographic when you guys are doing business development? Who are you looking for? What's the company size? What are the industries? What's the niche?
Yeah, I mean, it's a primarily a small to medium sized business. So we still continue to work with businesses as small as 10, 12, 15 employees. I would say the average is probably somewhere in the 70, 75 range. We also have companies that are several hundred, even in some cases, several thousand. Nothing really more than say 1,800, 2,200 people.
Hmm.
But yeah, the bread and butter for us is the SMB space. In terms of the type of business or the industry, we still, I would say, is we're probably 85 to 86% software or some software component. So it
Hmm.
could be a tech-enabled service or it could be embedded systems, things like that. We have a lot of saturation in the healthcare industry. Um, they typically are scrutinized pretty heavily. There's a lot of privacy regulations in terms of how you handle person identifiable information, person identifiable healthcare information more specifically. But at the end of the day, like anybody who has a business that stores or processes confidential information and actually cares about doing it right, and maybe that care is on their own. They've come up with that on their own from being prudent about their business, or maybe it's been brought to their attention by their insurance company or investors, board members, or customers. Those are we're open to work with all those companies. And like say we have manufacturing companies in the mix, we have pure service-based companies, we even have bricks and mortar companies, legal firms, dental clinics. We've got quite a variety, and we're actually seeing more of that variety lately. As I think the world is starting to catch on about how like you can't just like you can't
Can't
just
wing
sit
it.
there, you can't wing it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think like for us, what we don't like is the companies that don't actually care about it, but just want the easiest, cheapest way to get a badge.
Right.
Like that type of play where it's like they want a piece of paper to show their customers that they've got a good security program, but it's like, do they really have a good security program? Like there's so many vendors out there that are probably cheaper than us that can help you get a really cheap certification. And if you want to play the security theater game, then there's probably lots of opportunities. Well, there are opportunities out there, but for organizations, right? And I think that's why healthcare is big for us, because a lot of times they're not only answering a security questionnaire, but they're also signing security and data privacy addendums where they're legitimately signing a contract where they are committing to follow,
What you're
fairly,
telling them.
yeah,
Yeah.
right? Like they're or follow regulations and
Right.
strict, the strict obligations. And I think what's really fascinating in the space now is insurance providers are starting to up their game. They're starting like we're seeing a lot of companies come to us now because they go to renew their insurance and they get this big long security and data privacy, and there's a more sophisticated scrutiny going around cyber and privacy risk associated with companies that are looking to get insured. So that I think has broadened out the pool. I mean, from our perspective, the only difference between a software company and a service company is the software company. Most software companies are service companies as well.
Sure.
They just have this technical component of a cloud-based piece of software, which just is another domain or two that needs to be tagged on. So we work with a wide range, but we definitely specialize in that SMB range in terms of
What are
size.
your plans like moving forward? Are you guys? I mean, are you trying to? I don't know. Everybody's got their vision boards, kind of, or their here's our North Star. And are you guys looking to be one of the biggest players in this industry? Are you looking to become a consumer player? Like, where do you see your company
Yeah.
going?
We're not looking to be the biggest player in the industry. I would say, to be honest, we look at our differentiator as being our customer intimacy. We've actually made the decision a couple of quarters ago to transition our model from trying to be a pure SaaS solution to be a tech-enabled service provider. And that's drastically changed our differentiation in terms of how we converse with prospects. And it's changed our product roadmap substantially. So it allows us to really build product around that value proposition. And it's just really just became evident to us that if you're doing security theater, in other words, like just a term that we use and we use internally and some others in the industry as well, is like, when you're just doing the bare minimum to check boxes to make your customers feel as though they've done their due diligence. That can be done with software solutions pretty well. When you're actually trying to follow the rules and regulations and build a secure company, it would be like going out and saying, okay, we want to build a sales strategy, so let's go buy Salesforce. It's
Right.
like not quite how it works, right? You want expertise. You want people that are experts in the field or fields of security and data privacy that your business requires. And we just found that we spent a lot of time talking to our customer over the last year and realizing that for us, that's been the value proposition that really rings. So we're not trying to grow 3-4x year over year. We're trying to grow at a healthy growth rate, but not in any way at a velocity that is faster than that with which we can service our customers to the degree we feel is required to build that quality of a security and privacy program in a business.
Right. And so just like my mental picture, I guess, of this right now is when you talk about the theater of it would be sort of like a checklist. And do you have a privacy policy on your website? Check. Do you make people opt in for your email campaigns or whatever? I don't know, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you have this piece of software installed? Yep, got it. So that's kind of the theater part. I'm guessing what you guys do is more forensic, where you're going in and going, what happens when this system breaks? What happens when, or are you guys even going in and going like, who has access? Who has these passwords? Who,
All those things.
yeah, what's the chain of command on, or chain of custody on like getting into this piece of information or whatever,
All
right?
those things.
Okay.
Assessments, regular assessments, vulnerability scans, penetration tests on infrastructure, training, awareness training, making sure that the right controls are in place versus just everybody kind of picking the same cherry pick controls, just
Right.
really analyzing a business, and the product innovation that we do follows suit as well. So we all have access to these fabulous LLMs out there now, and AI has become more accessible and more capable than it ever has before. We've done quite a bit of innovation over the last year in our product, in how we embed that and tie that into process innovation around how our advisors can work with customers at a superb level of efficiency.
Very cool. Are you missing the music industry at this point, or do you still have a foot in it, or what's your involvement?
I I don't I mean, I did it for 20 years when I
Yeah.
really think about it, right? Like, do I miss it? Not really. I still listen to music. I even still play music periodically, but yeah, I think at a certain point, like, and my last company got to this point. At a certain point in a company, a lot of your work is running a company, building a
Right.
company, culture, managing people, coaching people, managing yourself, all
Right.
these things, right? So whether you're selling widgets or software or music, at a certain point in size as a leader of a company, your job isn't that different. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I love music. I don't have any aspirations of ever returning to the music industry per se, but I'll always still passionately listen to and periodically play music.
Got you. So, a couple of things. So, before we finish up, I listened to your podcast, which I thought was really cool, where you talk about all the different scams, basically, right? Like you have every episode is basically a different way that people get scammed, right? Or a different story around someone, whether it's yourself, a family member, a friend, or a client having fallen for something. Am I describing it correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I only did like I think I only did 11 or 12 episodes of that
Okay.
podcast.
I
It's
thought it was cool.
yeah, it's interesting because I ended up parking it because I wanted to rethink of it. Actually, I did the first handful of episodes exactly. I did a series on scammers and their scams.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is like a bit of a dip my toe into the world of podcasting. That got really good. People really liked that. But then when I transitioned to being more like drier security topics, it was like, oh, this is not the
Crickets.
same. It's kind of like crickets
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of was like, maybe I should just like, then I was like, well, maybe I'll do a podcast about scammers and their scams, but then it's like, wow, I'm gonna have to be really on top of it to do that. But it was a really fun, it was more fun from an episode perspective because I think this understanding the scammer, understanding the nefarious individual that you're
Yeah.
protecting yourself from is such a great way of learning about security, right? Because you
Right.
got to like, well, what are you doing this for? What are you protecting yourself? Like the mentality of thinking like the hacker, thinking like the criminal is very critical, right? It's not new. It's from traditional forms of physical security and law enforcement. This is sort of the psychological positioning that you want to take on to really understand how do you protect against the nefarious individual. That yeah, it was really fun episodes to do. But yeah, I just don't know. Like, I don't think I could do a weekly podcast
Yeah.
for
You
very.
run out
You're gonna
eventually.
run out of
Yeah.
scams, I guess,
Unless you
right?
get people to come on to interview them to talk about how they were scammed,
Well,
because
I was thinking what I was thinking about. I was also thinking about like I wonder if I could. I actually tried this where people were trying to scam me, like which happens all the time, like everyone else. I actually tried to get a few scammers. I tried to get a scammer to see if a scammer would allow me to interview them, but they get really freaked out when
well,
and they're just like SDRs, right? They're like sales development reps. They're just
yeah.
like dialing for dollars. So as soon as you come back, they're just like F you, hang up. They don't want to deal
So,
with you, right? Once they
so
realize they're not going to be able to scam you.
check this one out. This is a few months ago. Our son gets a call, and the caller ID on his phone is our daughter,
Oh, I
right?
love that. It's a good one.
And he picks it up, and it's a guy, I've got your effing sister, this and that, basically, that he's holding my daughter hostage. And you can hear a girl screaming in the background, and it's her phone number. So he completely loses his stuff. Now, he happens to be with my daughter-in-law at the time, who's, what's going on, and she's catching enough of the conversation. And this is kind of what saved him from being scammed. Is she texts my daughter's husband and said, is Haley okay? And he said, yeah, she's like right here. So
Right.
they
Yeah.
spoofed her number. They
Yep.
knew her name. They knew his name. Um, it's pretty freaky the lengths that people will go to. The other thing that they did that was really stupid is they act like they took her hostage. So in the meantime, we've got Allie, my daughter-in-law, kind of figuring out what's going on the backside, even though it's still scary. You got my son freaked out on the phone, but also realizing that his wife is kind of getting some data for him. But then the scammer asked for $2,000, which who that's going to
Like,
kidnap
so
someone's going
you're
to ask
gonna
for
go
two
through
thousand
this
bucks.
is like nearly life in prison for
Right,
2 grand, right?
right. And at that point, he was like, "Okay, Ali, what did you figure out on the other side?"
I
But it
actually
was.
covered that scheme in one of my episodes,
Did you
and I
really?
actually dissected it. And I actually did a thing where I brought on a tool, an AI voice encoder tool that enabled me to sound like other people. And I did a sample in there that was actually of my voice but I wrote it. I didn't actually speak it. So I trained the tool
To
in
talk
it
like you.
in to talk like me, not just in tone, but in intonation and velocity and word choice and things like that, which was very easy to do. You just, it trains itself. You feed it like, 60 seconds worth of a podcast episode. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, you can call grandma and, tell her you're in jail and need some money. But yeah, that's a so like you could even like like say somebody goes online and finds a voice of your daughter or something like that, they can emulate the screaming to make the screaming sound much more realistically like your daughter, things like that, right?
Wow.
And then mask their own voice so that you can't detect necessarily, or even you can even do things like if I wanted it to sound like I'm Indian or sound like I'm Arabic, like you could have it encoded so that when I talk the way I'm talking now, it would have the tonalities of an Arabic first language speaker speaking in English in their second language. So lots of various things. Yeah, I mean it's but I think that was kind of the purpose of that podcast, is like there's so much value in understanding, like you just have to really have to stand back and understand, like this is just a business for these people.
Right.
And like if you paid that person $2,000, which I'm sure there's people that are doing that, that person may live in a place where $2,000 covers their costs for 2 months.
Right. What
So
what would you recommend? So let's say let's go back to they had the ability to, again, text each other and figure out that it was bullshit, but what if they did go take the extra step? What if you take a call and it's the voice of one of your loved ones? You don't know that it's AI. It's just the voice of one of your loved ones, and they say, "Hey, I'm in trouble. Wire me some money," or whatever they're going to say. What's the way to test that? I mean, it's coming in from their phone number and it's their voice. So, how do you verify that before you move forward and do anything?
the first thing
Call
you
them
can
back?
do, call them back is one option. Now, if they're calling on what appears to be their number, then that's a really good play, because then it's not like I'd hate to give somebody advice that ends up with, because there's also
Right.
situations where like you're on a trip to Mexico and next
Yeah.
thing like you're actually,
Right.
somebody's
Stuff does
this is
happen.
real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, you got to be careful, like playing along, calm the hell down, calming down, slowing down a little bit, pretending that you're concerned, but keeping your cool so you can think, asking if you have the opportunity, if you're talking to that person that's claiming to be in need, think about something you can ask them that this hacker wouldn't know
Mm,
that they would know,
okay.
right? Like, what was the name of your first boyfriend? And like, what was that guy that I kicked out of the house in grade 10 that was, I found you in the living room, whatever, like something,
Right.
or have a good practice preemptively is to have a safe word or have some sort of code word. And I remember like we had a code word in my family since I was a child. It had nothing to do with this type of hacking, but the use case there was like you never, like if you never get in a car, there'll never be a time when somebody comes to the school that's not us, that's saying, hey, mom told me to come pick you up. And if ever there is, ask them for the code word.
Right.
If they don't know the code word, then we didn't tell them to pick you up. So
No, that's
like, that kind of mentality is a really good practice in there. If you're not able to talk to them, or, you're calling them and their number isn't answering, slow it down. If you're concerned that there could be this could be real, then you can buy time by pretending that you're going to, start
comply.
asking for help and
Hmm.
comply, right? And that gives you some time. It also gives them time, like it gives them time to mess up. Okay.
Right.
So like they're going to try to create urgency and panic because they want you to move quickly before you have the opportunity to talk to other people or get advice. At this point, I mean, I do recommend calling law enforcement if there's any doubt whatsoever. Absolutely. But while this is happening, you're telling them you're going to figure out how you're going to pay them. Um, and don't pay them, but make it sound like you're legitimately trying, and then shake every tree possible to find out where this loved one is and try to communicate with the loved one. And if like if you are concerned and you're not able to make that connection, then I think reaching out to law enforcement is obviously a good important play. But
For
yeah,
sure.
it's a pretty crazy scam, and it's been going on now for about a year. I know there was several cases of that, well, exactly what you described, happening both in Canada and the US. There was a whole news article that I watched on it, which actually inspired me to do the episode on it.
Yeah, after the fact, we searched for, it was like, okay, this isn't their first time. And we did find, I don't know if it's the same article you read, but we did find, it was documented. There were stories on it. I had never seen anything like that elaborate before. I mean, I thought that
One of
was
my
very crazy.
one of my friends who's a hacker, a long time, like long before we had, normal citizens had access to powerful AI tools. When the spoofers came out, we're probably going back to like 2012 or something like that. One of my hacker friends, I was sitting down in my living room and my phone rings and it's my wife's number. But my wife's also asleep on the sofa next to me. So this was
Right.
like, this is weird, right?
Right.
And I pick up the phone. He was talking to like one of these like Darth Vader
Yeah.
vocal things. It's like, Darren, we have your wife,
Right.
which would have been terrifying,
Right.
really, had she not been asleep
Right.
on the sofa next
Right.
to me.
Right. You're like, nice try, dude.
Yeah, good try, man. Yeah.
Awesome.
Keep
Well,
her. I don't like her that much anyways. Keep her. It's just, what?
thanks so much, Darren. Super interesting stuff. Your whole world is pretty fascinating, both the music industry and now with Carbide. So we'll put all the ways to find Carbide, of course, in the show notes. Anything else for us before we head out?
No, just look, if anyone's interested in connecting, I'm pretty easy to find. There's not many Darren Gallops out there, so you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect there. And if you're interested in learning more about what I'm doing in the cyber world, you can go to carbidesecure.com and be happy to chat with anyone that looking for some tips or pointers on this stuff.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darren. Take care.
You too. Thanks.